Our election law at Ohio State team is developing a new voting system. The concept comes from the world of sports, but the reason to adopt it is that it's a better way to achieve majority rule. It also handles the problem of polarization, which is afflicting American politics. This slide from the Pew Research Center shows just how much polarization has changed America over the last few years. We used to be more clumped in the center of the ideological spectrum, but we are literally pulling ourselves apart. And it's a challenge for any voting system that wants to adopt majority rule to handle that kind of polarization. So the sports idea that we're focused on is round robin competition. A round robin tournament is one in which every competitor has a match against every other competitor in the tournament. There's lots of examples. One that we find useful is from college football. The entire season is an extended round robin. Each team plays every other team. And at the end of the season, you have the standings, number of wins, number of losses. Now, the Big 12 Conference has a separate championship match among the top two teams from the round robin in order to identify the season's champion. And we think that two-stage process is a useful model, as we'll discuss. Another useful example from sports is World Cup soccer. It's also a two-stage system. The first stage is the round robin. There often can be ties in terms of wins and losses. And so there's a need to break the ties. Soccer uses something called the goal differential. It's the number of goals a team scores in all of its matches, minus all the goals against that team. That creates the statistic that allows you to break the tie to determine which team advances to the next round. Okay, and how does this work for an election? At Ohio State, again, we're proposing a two-stage process that's innovative, but the round robin principle, even in the context of elections, has been around for centuries, and also is featured in the work of some recent Nobel laureates who have been working on the mathematics of voting systems. So our two-round system starts with a nonpartisan primary among all qualifying candidates. That's similar to California's top two system, except California does not use a round robin, and we think it should. But it doesn't have to be an entire season like presidential primaries. Instead, a single election with a single ballot is enough. It can be the ranked choice ballot that is more commonly used these days. New York, for example, has just adopted ranked choice voting for its mayor's race. But the key idea here is that we're not going to calculate a winner the way New York does. That's called instant runoff voting. Instead, we're going to take those ballots and create the head-to-head matches that form the round robin competition. And we'll show you how that works. That's going to give us two candidates at the top of the standings, and they're going to be the two that go to the November ballot. Again, that's like California. Lots of other places have a two-round system where the second stage is just the top two finalists. That leads to a very simple final round, and it guarantees a majority winner when you've only got two candidates on the ballot. But the key idea is which two. And it's the round robin which will identify the two candidates most deserving for that final round. All right, to contrast the proposal, let's look at what happens currently. We have our own state of Ohio as a model. Ohio leans a little bit center right these days. And so the hypothetical we're showing you could be our state, could be Missouri, Iowa, Indiana, what have you. Here's 4 candidates and a set of first choice preferences among the voters for those candidates. because the current system in Ohio and many states only allows voters to register their first choices. So these terms should be familiar. We've got a progressive on the left, we've got a more centrist Democrat, and we've got a more center-right conservative, traditional conservative, and we've got a Trumpian populist. And what will happen when you've got voters with those preferences, and by the way, those preferences are more polarized, as we saw from Pew, because the two ends of the spectrum have more popularity than the two candidates in the middle. And when you've got that condition with traditional party primaries, the populist is going to beat the conservative in the Republican primary, and the Democrat in the Democratic primary, the progressive is going to beat the liberal, meaning your November election is going to be populist versus progressive. And by the way, in California's system of nonpartisan primaries, it's going to be the same result, because California will pick which are the two candidates with the most first place votes, and that's going to be the populist and the progressive. So it's the same November ballot. So let's contrast now our proposed round robin system, and it's going to look at not just voters' first choices, but because it uses these ranked choice ballots, it allows voters to list their first choice and all other choices that they might have. They don't have to rank every candidate, although our hypothetical will show it that way. The system works whether they do or they don't, but voters can rank all the candidates if they want to. So let's assume that the 31% of the electorate that really wants a populist, that their choices are linear, meaning that they want the progressive the least. At the opposite end of the spectrum, something similar, the quarter of voters who really want a progressive are going to want a Trumpian populist the least. A little more complicated with those voters in the middle, not as many as them as before, but they still exist. A lot of them will be loyal to their own party. So voters who want a more traditional Republican will still vote for a Trumpian populist before any Democrat. But there will be a group of voters that we're even calling them the Biden Republicans, who would vote for a centrist Democrat before they would vote for Trumpian populists. On the other side of the aisle, you've got loyal Democrats who would prefer a centrist but would still vote for a progressive before any Republican. But there'll be a sliver of voters in the middle who would cross party lines before they chose somebody that they thought was too left-wing. Okay, with these preferences, what are the results? To figure that out, we create the standings. And we do that by creating first all of the head-to-head matches. So here are the head-to-heads, and we'll show you how you can get them from the ballots. So the first one is populist versus conservative. We ignore the other two candidates, and we see that the conservative beats the populist on all of these ballots, almost 70%. The populist is only getting that cohort of ballots that most favor that candidate. So that's a pretty decisive majority win there. Now let's do another example, populist versus liberal. The liberal beats the populist on all of these ballots, not as many as before, 55%. The populist is picking up another cohort of ballots, but only 45%. So that's the result there. Same thing with all the other matches, but you get the method. And that's what gives us our standings. This should look familiar from sports. The conservative wins all three of its matches. The liberal wins 2 out of 3. Those are our top two candidates. But I want to show you the statistic that's analogous to soccer's goal differential. We're calling it vote differential, and it's computed similarly. You calculate all of the votes for a candidate across all 3 of the matches, and then you subtract all the votes against that candidate from those same matches. That gives you your vote differential. It's a really good measure of just how strong voters like that candidate or dislike the candidate relative to the other candidates. So a good measure of majority support for that candidate. You can also calculate the same number from the win margins of each victory. A common statistic in the world of elections, sometimes we think of 51 to 49 squeakers or 60-40 landslides. Well, if you add up all of those win margins, you get the same 68, the vote differential. That's again that good indication of relative strength of each candidate. But for purposes of the primary, in identifying the top two, with this example, again, all we need to do is that first measurement of strength, number of wins, and the conservative and the liberal are clearly the top two by that measure with this example. Okay, so contrast what we just did with how instant runoff voting handles the exact same ranked ballots with exact same voter preferences. IRV goes back to those first choice votes and sees that nobody has a majority and then knocks out the candidate with the lowest number of first choice votes. So that's the liberal. It then redistributes the ballots to whoever is listed second on those ballots, some conservative, some progressive. And as a result of redistribution, this is what it looks like. Still nobody above 50%. You need to knock out the person in last place. So conservative gets knocked out, leading to another redistribution. Populist gets some, progressive gets some. And at the end, instant runoff voting says that the populist beats the progressive. So notice what happens when we look at all three systems compared to round robin. The traditional party primary thinks that the two best candidates are the populist and the progressive from the partisan primaries. California top two has the same result by its method. And again, instant runoff voting says the populist is definitely going to beat the progressive. Only round robin voting identifies that it's actually the conservative and the liberal that are the two strongest candidates. Conservatives likely to win in a center-right state like Ohio, but at least those are the two candidates that deserve to go to the final round. How do we know that round robin is doing a better job in determining voter preferences? It's because it looks at the votes against as well as the votes for, not just enthusiasm for some candidates, but the opposition that candidates can generate. We see that the populist and the progressive have all these votes against them when those candidates have to go head-to-head against the competition, and that causes their vote differentials to be in negative territory. They're very unpopular. So they don't deserve to be the two finalists. The two finalists should be the two more popular candidates, the conservative and the liberal. So that's the essence of the system. We just want to show you how ties can be broken when they need to be, as in soccer. So we've introduced a fifth candidate we're calling the opportunist. Think of this as a Republican who's trying to figure out, are they a traditional conservative or a Trumpian populist, or can they straddle that line? Well, in our example, they're not especially successful. They got about 10% of first place votes. And the ballots that we've created to illustrate this point cause a three-way tie for second place. Obviously, the conservative is still at the top with 4 victories and no losses, but 3 candidates are tied for second place. What do? We break that tie using our vote differential statistic. We see that of these 3 candidates, the liberal is the one that the voters more prefer when compared to every other candidate. The strength of majority preferences is stronger for that candidate despite those ties. And that's what means that the liberal deserves to go on to the November ballot along with the conservative. So that's the proposal. We think it should be considered along with other forms of ranked choice voting like New York. It's a way to better achieve majority rule and a better handle the problem of polarization. Thank you.